Senator Fawcett. Senator Canavan.
Mr Acting Deputy President, I was just sitting there noticing I think you've got a very nice tie on tonight, Mr Acting Deputy President. So
It's very kind.
I'll butter you up to start this speech, so hopefully you'll be kind to me. Yeah, that's used up 10 seconds already. So I do rise to speak on the Migration Amendment Strengthening Biometrics Integrity Bill 2015, and I'm happy to rise in support of that bill because it's a very important update to our security framework. Obviously, our border security framework is some of the most important legislation that we administer and pass in this place, and some of the provisions that are being updated in this bill, or will update the Migration Act, have been in place now for almost a decade. As a country, we've been collecting biometrics data now for almost 10 years, and I do think the provisions in this bill provide sensible and modern updates to our biometrics collection framework. They are needed due to the changes in technology that have occurred in this area, and also to expand the scheme to include minors, as Senator Fawcett was outlining just earlier. I'll come back to those points later in my speech, but at the outset, want to place this bill in the broader framework that of the government's agenda, which has been to strengthen our national security framework. This bill does support the broader changes that were made to the Counter-Terrorism Legislation Amendment Foreign Fighters Act 2014. That Act did a range of things, including addressing the emerging threat of Australians seeking to travel overseas to fight with terrorist organisations. This bill will help provide our law enforcement agencies with more information and more data collection powers to help them enforce the provisions of that earlier bill, and therefore it's very important in that regard. Of course, it does also fit into the broader framework of the Prime Minister's National Security Statement earlier this year, that further legislation to combat terrorism and to keep our country and our people safe would be forthcoming. This is another version of that bill. Of course, I don't need to remind people in this chamber the events of the last couple of years have made it more keenly felt here, the risks that we do face from terrorism events. We have faced them for some time, and as I said, the provisions in this bill to do with biometrics emerged in a previous bout of terrorism incidents, and the changes being made in this bill are a sensible update to those earlier changes. They do relate to biometrics, or the collection of biometrics by our border security enforcement agencies, and biometrics in simple terms are just identifiers, or unique identifiers that relate to each of us individually, that allow enforcement agencies to identify particular individuals. They, of course, include things like facial images, fingerprints, iris scans, anything that can be digitised into a template and automated for storage and checking. That's a biometric. The department has been collecting biometrics, as I said, since 2006. It has progressively expanded the collection of biometrics over this time, using a risk-based approach to identify who and what is collected. In 2010, the department commenced collecting biometrics from non-citizens applying for protection in Australia and from overseas applicants for visas, in particularly high-risk countries. Biometrics are an extremely important integrity measure that contribute to protecting our borders and prevent the entry of persons who may do us harm. They anchor this information in a particular person's biography, such as their name, their nationality, their date of birth, and it adds to the capability of our law enforcement agents to identify that person and to ensure that person is not trying to fraudulently pass them off as someone else. They are more accurate than document-based checks, which of course can be subject to fraud, because they can be linked to someone's broader documents, which prevents or at least minimises the chance of fraud occurring. So far, the department has made more than 9,000 fingerprint matches over this period. These matches have revealed undisclosed security and criminal histories, as well as discrepancies between the biographic data provided to the department by individuals and that provided to other agencies. So they are clearly a very important law enforcement tool. They've also been used to expose identity and immigration fraud. This includes individuals who have returned to Australia or tried to return under assumed identities years after being removed from the country. Some others have attempted to gain protection here under assumed identities where they have already have protection in other countries. Current biometric measures have exposed fraudulent and illegal activity in these instances, but the sophistication of the technology used to enter Australia illegally has started to develop and evolve and strain the resources of our existing agencies. It's our duty to make sure, therefore, that our laws are updated to match these technological developments, and that is why we are proposing these amendments today. Our current regime has effectively supported our border protection efforts for some time, but we do need to keep pace with these emerging technologies. So what does this bill do? Well, this bill does provide a more simplified framework for the collection of biometrics. I believe currently the department or the government is limited to 12, I think, prescribed purposes for which they can collect biometric data. This bill will replace those 12. That's right, 12 existing purposes with a broader ability or power to collect biometric information in accordance with the purposes of the Act and the regulations. And importantly, this bill will allow the government or the department to update and be flexible as technology develops to collect biometric data in another way. And I know there are some concerns that this bill broadens the powers of the executive to collect this information, but I would say that any changes to regulations, the particular application of those regulations in this Act by the executive, be they a coalition or future other political party governments, are still subject to the scrutiny of this place, are still subject to the scrutiny of Parliament, including through our estimates procedures. And I'm sure if there are any departures from the purposes as listed in this bill, they'll be diligently exposed by this chamber, because it is important to say that while this bill does provide for a simplified scheme for the collection of this data, it does not introduce a universal biometrics collection policy. The department will continue to facilitate the smooth travel to Australia of the overwhelming majority of people who are legitimate travellers and law-abiding people, without collecting additional biometrics. While acknowledging the impact on travellers in circumstances where a certain amount of identity verification is required, the increased collection powers are proportionate to the legitimate purpose of protecting the Australian community and the integrity of the migration program. The bill will also address gaps in our existing biometric legislative framework and replace 7 existing provisions in the Migration Act which separately authorise the collection of biometrics in particular circumstances, with a single broad discretionary power to collect biometrics for the purposes of the Migration Act or the migration regulations. Streamlining these multiple provisions will remove inconsistencies and duplication and enhance the department's effort to achieve important government policy objectives. These include removing current restrictions on circumstances where biometrics can be collected and providing flexibility in the collection of biometrics from citizens and non-citizens who are arriving and departing Australia. The bill provides a broader power to collect biometrics from non-citizens who have been identified as of concern after their arrival and from behaviour while living in Australia. Significant numbers of non-citizens have not had identity, security and criminal history checks conducted under the department's biometric program, either because of the timing of their entry into Australia or because of their method of arrival. Only a small number of non-citizens are required to provide their biometrics for checking each year. In 2013-14, less than 2% of non-citizens granted a visa to come to Australia provided biometrics to the department. As a result, the higher integrity, identity, security, law enforcement and immigration history checks that are possible using biometrics have only been conducted on a small number of people who have travelled to Australia. So it's very important that this bill expands those instances where data is collected. As I said earlier, this bill will provide the ability to remain flexible, particularly in the face of emerging technologies. That was identified in the Senate committee report, where the department did outline how, at times, the existing provisions of the bill restrict them to using certain types of traditional technology, for example, collecting fingerprints. This bill will provide them the ability to use mobile phones and indeed to collect data in other ways in the future through technologies that we probably can't envisage at the moment. This bill also will, as I said earlier, allow the collection of biometric information from minors, which may sound strange, but it is important. It's an important people smuggling protection, and for that reason should be supported. As I said to begin my contribution, I believe this bill is a timely updating of our border security framework, and in particular our ability to collect biometric information, and should be supported by the Senate.
Thank you very much.